All right, guys. So what's up? Today I'm going to be doing a review of Alien Covenant. The first part of the review is going to be spoiler free, and then the second part will definitely dive into those spoilerific fan theories. Um, it's just me today. Unfortunately, Gian has not seen the movie yet. Shame on him. Um, so yeah, you're just gonna have to deal with my ugly face for the next however long this ends up being. So let's get right into it. What did I feel about it? I really enjoyed it. It's definitely the best movie since probably Aliens, at least in the Alien franchise, I mean. Um, it's still continuing that science fiction trend that Prometheus did, however, because I feel like the franchise, someone had mentioned this on a film set I was on the other day, where he feels like the film, like the whole franchise itself, has transitioned into different genres over the years. At first, it was your straight horror, and then obviously James Cameron came in and changed the game with Aliens, which was basically a straight up action survival film. And then from there, the movies kind of teetered and did their own thing. And then when Ridley Scott came back into the directing chair, Prometheus was pretty much a straight up sci-fi film. There were small hints of horror, excuse me, but overall, it was pretty much a science fiction movie. And this movie synthesizes Ridley's two films, and so it's part horror, part science fiction, part works, part doesn't work. I'll definitely get into the nitty gritty in the second half, but for now, um, for the most part, that blend worked. But there's just the moments throughout the movie where you wish it was more horror, and then there were moments where you wish it were more sci-fi instead. So finding that balance was a little tricky, and honestly, because of that, I need to revisit the movie because, to be quite honest with you, I was the whole time I was thinking um, about things other than the movie, and what I mean by that is, um, I was starting to think about factors that went in this movie. How much control did Ridley have over the vision? How much was the studio, Fox involved, saying, "Hey, look, we have all this feedback from Prometheus. Like, don't forget to include the alien this time. Don't forget to include this time." Just because if you read, if you've been following the movie like I was, um, since Prometheus, it's pretty much changed over the years. Um, Ridley Scott pretty much had a story in mind for what he wanted it to be, in this movie, I should say, and it really wasn't that. Um, so for those who don't know, Prometheus was going to be a straight up Alien prequel, okay, and I mean like straight up, like LV-426 status. It's basically the same movie as not the same movie as Prometheus, but like similar circumstance, and they crash onto this. The crash that happens in Prometheus was supposed to be like the actual crash that the you know people find in the first Alien. Um, but that changed. Damon Lindelof came in and he was like, "No, this makes too much sense. The script makes too much sense. Let's make it more science fiction. Let's make it more ambiguous. Let's make it more open ended ending." That's basically what ambiguous means. So that was a dumb redundancy by me. But anyway, um, so they gutted the alien elements from that script, and then it became Prometheus. Introduced the engineers, things like that. At least in the form that we see them today. And the sequel to Prometheus was supposed to be Paradise because, as Damon Lindelof said in one of his interviews, that Prometheus has two babies, and one of them grows up to be Alien, and the other one grows up to be this other movie. And basically, I and Ridley Scott are more interested in the other movie. And to be quite honest with you, me too. Just because Alien is pretty straightforward. I love it. It's one of my favorite movies of all time, and I really, really mean that. Especially Aliens, or both of those together. Definitely top movies of all time. Period. Um. Anyway, So, the ideas that Ridley presented in Prometheus, I was actually a little disappointed that they were even linked to the Alien franchise. Like, I almost wish that Prometheus was a separate entity, maybe existed within the universe, but just had nothing to do with the xenomorph and stuff like that, which it kind of was until that very, 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 very last scene in Prometheus, like the after credit scene where like you see the xenomorph or whatever it is being born, and so I was on board with like the other baby, let's put it that way. And a few months later, Ridley Scott was on an interview basically saying that he knew how the movie was going to end, and so people wanted to know like because it's super ambiguous in the first one. It's like, why did people hate engineers? Right? I mean, excuse me, why did the engineers hate human beings? What we don't know, and according to Ridley Scott, now obviously this probably isn't canon. I would assume it's not canon. Um, but he did say this, and I'm going to post a link to like the interview or whatever. But he was saying how the reason why engineers hate humanity so much is because, unbeknownst to humans, we have had interactions with engineers in the past. One in particular. And this isn't a like aliens built the pyramids thing, like, oh, the engineers really built the pyramid. No, 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 no. Not that at all. Because that's what I would have assumed at first, right? But no. So he goes on to say that one of the engineers was sent to Earth. I'm not too sure what he said, basically the reasoning, but basically that engineer was Jesus Christ. So yes, in the Alien universe, that wasn't written, but at least was verbally spoken by Ridley. So I'm sure there's some form of this somewhere. Um, yeah, Jesus Christ was an engineer, and because we killed him, we killed one of their people. The engineers didn't like us anymore. So needless to say, which makes sense. I can believe it, especially coming from Ridley Scott. If it was from another director, it would have been like, who wrote this article? This seems bitchy, or this seems like a lie, not bitchy. That doesn't make any sense. Um, but yeah, if you look at Ridley Scott's body of work, he really has this relationship with the Christian church. I mean, you have Kingdom of Heaven. Obviously, that's about the Crusades. That's obviously Christianity. Um, let's see, what else do you have? Well, Prometheus, duh, that's what we're talking about. It doesn't have to do with Christianity, but more about spirituality and faith. Let's see, what other things has he done? Well, he did Gladiator, which that's not necessarily a Christian film, but it takes place during the Roman Empire. He did Gods of Egypt, which again doesn't have to do with the Christian Empire, but it does have to do with a film that revolves somewhat around that time period. So for me, it's not a stretch that he would do that, because I could totally see him filming, um, that flashback scene if it were to ever have been in a movie where they have like a Jesus like figure, and it might have been too cheesy. Maybe that's where they were like, you know what, that's too far. But personally, I probably would have dug it, to be honest with you. That would have been kind of cool, because at least it's different. That's the thing. At least it would have been different. But anyway, tying back into Covenant. Okay, so the whole point of Covenant is, um, well, it was supposed to be. This is my whole point. The sequel to Prometheus was supposed to be about Shaw and David, um, basically taking that ship and flying to the engineer homeworld and to find them, to figure out what it was all about. And the path that I just told you right now was what the original vision was going to be, and that's not what this movie turned out to be at all. At all. And I think now is a good time to transition to the spoiler side of things. So, you know, from here on out, it's going to be spoilers for sure. Give you a little countdown. 3, 2, 1. Spoiler time. Okay, so how many out there were disappointed that Shaw, the fucking heroine of the first one, was not even in the second one at all, with the exception of a very, very small flashback? I was at first, especially. I mean, it really wasn't a spoiler to me personally, because, like I had mentioned before, I had been following this movie, and you know, there was rumors that this movie was going to be without Shaw, at least in the capacity of her being the main hero. So I was a little disappointed, to be honest with you. It's just, you know, it was supposed to be their story, and I read so much about it, and so I was like, "Fuck, man!" But as the movie got closer, and I started seeing all of the trailers and the posters, because I mean, come on, the posters were fucking the best part about this whole like Alien Covenant thing. Is like the posters they put out. There's that one with all the aliens and engineers intertwined. Dude, it's fucking beautiful. I'm waiting for it to go down on eBay so I can get one. But anyway, um, so I was kind of accepting the fact that she wasn't going to be in it, and then when I saw it, it didn't really bother me, but it did bring up something that did bother me to an extent. Um, it's just general lack of continuing the thread of Prometheus in the way that everyone thought it was going to be. I feel like this movie was just was I feel like the point of this movie was to basically erase Prometheus, but not everything, but basically all the bad parts and to correct all the bad parts by basically rewriting them in the sequel. And so, like, now that this movie exists, Alien Covenant, I'm very curious to see what Prometheus plays like now that I know, like, the new canon and, like, what everything means and everything. I almost feel as though Prometheus just got elevated to a better movie, to be honest with you. When you see that white creature at the end of Prometheus, you know, it's kind of random and out of place. It really is random and out of place and has nothing to do with the world because you don't see any eggs. It's not really a xenomorph, but it looks like one. It kind of acts like one, but it's like, why? Why, right? Like, why is this even here? It doesn't make any sense. Well, I have two things to respond to that. One I had previously mentioned has to do with the non-spoiler section of this, where I mentioned that Ridley Scott envisioned Jesus Christ as an engineer. So the reason why Ridley Scott did this, and the reason why, so, you know, was to set up Prometheus, so they hate the humans and stuff like that. But if you remember from Prometheus, um, David discovers, or someone discovers, basically that the ship is a ship, obviously, but it's full of these biological bombs, and the bombs were actually going to fucking kill. They can kill like any life at all, right? They just suck out the life, and these creatures, they just sift through and just kill all life itself, right? And they were created by the engineers, and that's why when this crew, the Covenant crew, lands on this new planet or moon or whatever it is, um, they don't hear anything because, as you will find out, David killed all of the life that like all the life on this planet. And so yeah, David killed all the engineers. So yeah, that's where I was leading to. That's why it was disappointing, because I was looking forward to meeting the engineers, seeing their world and things like that. And we get to see their world all right, but no engineers because David murked every single last one of the motherfuckers. So Shaw, we find out that Shaw repaired David. He fixed his head, put it on a nice new body with like no wires and shit. So like she somehow like super fucking figured out how to like reassemble him. I mean, she had nothing else better to do, right? But anyway, on this voyage, David puts her into cryo sleep, and basically that's the end of her forever. And David arrives on the engineer planet, and sure enough, he uses those fucking biological bombs and murders all the engineers, creating these like those black pus things that you see in Prometheus, and it just like manifests and just continues to like evolve into different forms, and it just fucking wipes out all life basically. And then we find out that David's been experimenting on these creatures and has been trying to perfect the ultimate biological weapon. And then that ends up being the xenomorph. Oh my god, spoiler. That actually is something I like. But I just didn't like how it kind of turned into a story about, I mean, it was kind of always about David from the beginning. What I mean is the parts that focus on David and his research are really interesting because that's the part of Prometheus that I wanted to see in terms of like the sequel. Like I wanted to see these parts in the sequel. But then you have the other crew, the other new crew that gets, lured basically into the planet, and you follow them and you're supposed to care about them as well, but they don't really have the um, depth that obviously David had, being one movie deep. Um, so it's like new people, new crew, everything. Like there was no, like if somehow, and it doesn't make any sense, but like if somehow Shaw were alive and she was trying to escape the planet and she gets this crew, like she helps this crew escape, right? At least Shaw would be an element from the previous film that you could attach yourself onto, since this is supposed to be a sequel, right? So since there's no characters like that, it's all new fresh faces. But then you have David, so like you kind of almost inherently root for the guy because you've been with him for a movie. And then Michael Fassbender's obviously awesome, and David's just more interesting than Walter, who's the other android. Um, but but you know those separate moments where they can be independent of one another, which is what I was saying at the very beginning, fucking great. It's just when they overlap, I don't know what to feel, because like sometimes I'm like, fuck, I wish it was just like I was saying earlier. I wish they would have just kept it more science fiction. I want to learn more about what David was doing. I want to see more of his experiments and shit like that. I want to see it. But then at the same time, at that point in the movie, like the stakes are supposed to be at the highest. So it's like these guys need to get the fuck out of here. Like, where's the xenomorph? Like, how are they gonna handle this shit? So it's like all of a sudden, you know, it doesn't necessarily blend well all the time. Did that detract me from from enjoying the movie? Not at all. Not at all. This is me being a fart sniffer, super pretentious about it, like really analyzing the movie. I enjoyed it through and through. I like the fact that James Franco was in like the little teaser, online only, and then died at the very beginning of the movie, just because I feel like none of the Alien movies are really about star power. Um, not not saying that James Franco's a big, huge guy, but it would have felt like, okay, let's get this guy in there so we can get some money. Like it would have felt like a studio decision. And so maybe it was one, and then Ridley Scott was like, "Yeah, we can have James Franco in this, but he's not going to make the final cut just by chance." Who knows? I'm not speculating on that. Like I'm just being funny here, but I'm totally glad that he died, because I just didn't want to like have that Planet of the Apes effect where he was in the first one and it was cool. It was, I really enjoyed the first one, and I was slightly disappointed that he wasn't in the second one. But then I was like, wait, this isn't his story. I'm glad that he's not in it. And that's the thing. I didn't want him to be a distraction. That's all. That's really what I'm saying. I have no problems. Really, I really don't have a problem with any of the Francos, but it would have been a little bit of distraction. I'm obviously have Danny McBride in there and stuff like that, but you know, his I don't know. None of the characters really stood out though, but to go back on point. So the reason why James Franco dies actually stems from the scariest part of the movie for me personally. And it has nothing to do with xenomorphs fucking being murdered by fucking creatures on any mysterious planet or anything like that. It has nothing to do with any of that stuff. It has to do with pure space. And space is a scary ass place, all right? You don't really need an alien to make space scary. The ship that the crew is riding on is a ship called Covenant. And it seems as though the purpose of this ship is to colonize a new world. They're on some journey. I don't know how long it was. Let's just say 100 years or something, in cryo sleep, where they were put out, and then they were just, traveling along to their destination. And they're about 7 years from their destination. So they've traveled most of the journey. And so Walter is patrolling the Covenant. Walter is the new updated David android, as I mentioned earlier. And he's the only one awake on board, obviously, because he doesn't sleep. So he's, going around checking all the pods, making sure all the crew's alive, their vitals are okay, there's embryos on board, because like I said, they're trying to colonize a new world. And I don't know what's going on Earth. It's not really important. That's the point of Covenant. And as David is doing his inspections of everything, Mother comes on board, because Mother's back now. Mother comes online and she's like, David, there's a neutrino star that erupted, that like, blasted 1.1 light years away, impact imminent in, 10 seconds or something like that, right? Because there's a fucking huge wave from some sort of solar flare or something like some shock wave from the blast of the star, right? Because the star fucking exploded. Now, what proceeds to happen is literally in 10 seconds, this fucking wave comes and blasts and rocks the ship, like fucking stasis pods are falling off the ceiling and shit, like things are getting fucked up. The crew wakes up, and that's when James Franco dies because they can't get him out of the cryo chamber. Like, he can't get out. And he's awake, and you can just see him burning alive. And it's kind of a fucking intense moment. But it was so fucking scary because just think about that shit, dude. You're on Earth, and you're like, all right, next time I wake up, I'm going to be in a new world. It's just like sleep. Sleeping's weird in and of itself. You don't even need to go to a new world. You just fucking go to sleep at midnight, and you wake up at 8 in the morning or whenever you wake up. You know what I mean? And it's like 8 hours went by like that. And you're just like, fuck, dude, that's crazy. So at any point, we could just not wake up. That could be a reality of the situation where people die in their sleep all the time. And but imagine going to a new world, and you're like, I don't know, fucking 100 years into a 107-year journey, or I don't know what the exact is, but you're 100 years in, you're almost there, and then a star blows up and kills you. A star blows up. I mean, what are the odds, right? What are the fucking odds? Obviously, the sun could blow up right now, and we wouldn't know until 8 minutes, and then we'd all be dead, and then you wouldn't see this video, unfortunately. But I'm just saying, though, it's really scary because there's nothing you do about it. I mean, there was nothing David could have done, or excuse me, there's nothing Walter could have done. There was nothing Mother could have done. Mother detected it. By the time she detected it, it was already too fucking late. It's just like an asteroid impact, dude. It's like, we don't know what's out there, really. I mean, we track things and stuff for the meteors and asteroids and things like that, but, I think they've discovered like 1,100 potential impact objects. 1,100, you even really think out of all the vastness of space that there's only 1,100? Yeah, right. There could be rogue asteroids that just got launched and are just flying through the air, and we just might happen to be in the orbit at the right time and just boom. Maybe we detect it, but it'll hit us in 3 days. Yeah, what are we going to do in 3 days? Nothing. So it's just a scary thought, And I really like how Ridley went to the detail that he did to show it, to go and to show the shockwave and to show the impact. And it's just a creative way to show it because you really didn't have to. I mean, there had to have been some event that sparked it, but it could have been anything. It could have been they just woke up. I mean, maybe Mother just woke them up because I believe that's what happens in the first Alien. Actually, that is exactly what happens in the first Alien. So maybe you didn't want to do that because it would have been copying. But, if Mother's programmed to receive things, I'm just saying, obviously in the context of this particular story, that wouldn't have worked out, but you never know. So, yeah, so they wake up from their sleep because they have to do maintenance on the ship now. And none of it, they have to bury James Franco. They give him a little space funeral and shit like that. And it's just a sad, somber time. Everyone's a couple. It appears like there's no real depth to any of these characters. They're kind of just symbols. They're figures. Like, okay, the captain is the super religious one, and then the other girl, who's basically our main protagonist, is more your traditional heroine, where she's science based and she goes on reason and things like that. So I mean, they're not necessarily deep characters, but they represent ideas and thoughts and themes, and that's how they're able to interact with one another. And for the most part, it works. So they wake up and they discover that everything's fucked, right? And as they're traveling, they pick up this fucking frequency because Danny McBride has to go and fix these solar panel sails and shit like that. And as he's out there, he has this weird, intense experience where he's seeing shit in his visor and stuff like that. And then Mother analyzes it once he gets back in, and then they find this, not a distress signal, but music. And it's stemming from this one moon or planet or whatever, and that's ends up being the engineer homeworld. We don't know that yet. And so there's a debate on the ship. It's okay, this new planet, and they do a scan on it, and they're seeing that it's hitting everything that they need in order to have life and shit like that, to colonize the planet. And the captain's kind of like a man of God. So he's like, well, if this was meant to be, like, I'm sorry about your husband, because the James Franco was the main captain and he died. So the man of faith became like, he was second in charge, so he became the captain. And the James Franco's wife is the protagonist. And so like he's telling her like, I'm sorry that he died, but like maybe this was just meant to be. And so they kind of, he makes a decision like, we're gonna go check it out. It's 7 weeks off our course. If we're wrong, then we'll pack up and we'll leave. And if we're not, then we'll just stay here. Like, why? None of us want to go back to sleep. So none of us want to be on a spaceship doing nothing for the next 7 years. So if it works, it works. So they go down, and the covenant, excuse me, is this huge colonial craft, right? Like I said, it's trying to create a colony, like it's trying to inhabit a planet. And so it's hovering above this planet or moon or whatever, and then the main crew drops down in like a drop ship, and then they land on the planet. And they, as I mentioned earlier, they immediately notice like they don't hear anything, and we're not suspect. Like, we don't know anything about what's going on so far. We don't know where David is. We don't know where Shaw is. Like, we don't know any of this stuff. Okay. The only time we see David up until this point is a flashback where David's with Mr. Wayland before Prometheus. So it's like even before anything. It's actually when he first gets turned on, I think. And he's already like, fuck you to Mr. Wayland. Like, he's already not happy with him. He already hates his creator. And that's a theme that comes back into this movie. But anyway, so just thinking about, they're thinking about the fact that there's nothing going on. And I'm like, ooh, what's going on, right? And then they discover the ship that David and Shaw took from Prometheus, and it crashed. It's crashed into like the side of a mountain or some shit. And so the way they go about exploring the planet, and I need to circle back for 1 second because I forgot to explain this. The most of the crew comes down on this landing craft, and then that crew gets divided into two. One of the girls and then like one of the soldiers, basically they go and like collect fauna or some shit like that. And then the other team is going to find like a nice spot to like, settle down, like to actually like, they're just basically exploring, right? And the fauna crew encounter this spore like, I don't know, like a spore. It's basically like this spore like shit. And then the other team actually encounters a similar spore, but inside the Covenant ship. As the girl and the soldier are collecting the fauna, the soldier steps on this like spore thing, and it releases, and it goes into his ear and starts infecting him and shit, right? Now, at first I was like, in the ear, really? That was too convenient, because it started to make me think about what I didn't like about Prometheus, which was like the alien elements that were in the movie felt very heavy-handed and just dumb. I mean, I think even Quentin Tarantino talks shit about the snake with there's a scene with the alien snake, and the guy puts his face right up into it, like, and then it bites him, and it's like, oh, well, what did you fucking expect it to do, right? But so it's kind of like that, where I was like, really? He's gonna break a spore open and it's just gonna travel into your ear? That's what I was thinking at first. It gets explained, and then I buy it now. Like, it doesn't. That's why I was saying earlier that this movie was written to fix the mistakes of Prometheus. So like even the stupid shit that happens in Prometheus, it doesn't look as stupid once you know what goes on in this movie, right? Because you find out that the reason why they're so good at fucking killing people is, in Prometheus you find out that they're biological weapons, right? And so, they're meant to just kill whatever. But then when you put in the context of Ridley Scott saying an engineer was Jesus, it makes sense why they would be prone to killing humans, right? Just saying. So, but then you find out later that David's been engineering these spores to basically he's trying to create the ultimate form. So he's created all these different strands of this original biological weapon. And so it makes sense why there would be a spore on this planet next to the spaceship, mind you, because obviously all of the fauna location and the spaceship location, obviously that's in the space station. I mean the ship are all within a certain radius that I can see David, who has nothing but time on his hands, would go around and maybe plant some shit, right? And obviously that probably spread to the area, which is why you don't hear anything. Because David killed everything, trying to experiment and create that ultimate biological weapon. And so these spores, in typical alien fashion, manifest into some sort of organism that's living within, and it leads to one of the best moments of the whole movie, I should say, period. And it's the first time that like this creature busts out, and the way it busts out is like super fucking gory. It's violent. It seemed to mix like CG and practical effects a little bit, which is kind of what gave it that like weird intense feeling where it was like, ooh, this is like good. But just the stakes, just the context, just the way it was set up, like everything just was flowing in that. Like that was the perfect Ridley Scott alien movie. Like if you wanted something alien since the first one, like you wanted that OG alien feeling, that OG alien scene, that was this. And so you get it. If that's what you wanted, you get it. There's even the news that you know, that neomorph shit that ends up popping out. But it's just fucking badass. So basically shit goes to shit real quick after these spores are released, and most of the crew gets fucking just blown out, and then these neomorphs grow up really quick because, like I said, they're fucking being, as we don't know this yet, but we find out that David has been manipulating all of this genetic shit. He's been creating things. He's been busy. He's been busy creating. And so it makes sense why they grow up real quick, and you know, they're the ultimate killing machines. It's whatever they need to do to be the ultimate killing machines, the ultimate biological weapon. And so most of these people are getting taken out, and finally David comes to the rescue. One of the dumbest parts ever. He's wearing this stupid cloak, and it was just like really fucking cheesy. Like, why? Why are you wearing the cloak? Like, why? That to me, that was just being like, oh, let's do some cool costume where I like wear a cloak. Who fucking cares? There's no fucking animals or anything because David's killed them all, so he's not hiding from anything. You know what I mean? Like, if there were like super predators out there and he needed to blend in or some shit, okay, why not? Is it cold? He's a fucking android, so what the fuck does it matter? Unless there's some shit that I don't know about, but there's no reason for a cloak. It's not to protect his skin from the sun because it's nighttime. Like, there's literally no reason for it, and it was dumb. It was gimmicky. Like, whatever. Maybe I'm being too pretentious about it, but it took me out of the movie is what I'm saying. Like, maybe it wasn't dumb. Like, maybe if I was making the movie, I'd be like, yeah, dude, that's fucking badass. Like, it probably is. It is badass. I'm not going to lie. It is badass. Yeah, it's badass. But not going to say it didn't take me out because it did. So, and then you find out this other, like, world, this whole fucking world, and it looks oddly like the Roman Empire, but like modernized a little bit. Like there's a shot when the flashback where you see like a camera going over the city and shit, and it looks straight out of like a Ridley Scott movie. I know it's ironic, it's his movie, but what I mean by that is like a Gladiator or something where you have that like helicopter shot over the city of Rome or something, like the CGI city of Rome. And it was pretty impactful because then you find out that the place David's been inhabiting has been the Covenant, the engineer home world, but they're not there. And then you find out in the flashback that David nuked them all. And then the movie kind of turns into like the only reason why David's interested in them is because he's finally perfected the little creature, but he just needs a host for it because he's killed everything. And so he starts experimenting on the humans. And that's where the biggest reveal of the movie comes in. David created the xenomorph. Now, how do I feel about that? Because that changes basically everything. That's the biggest change you could have done to the whole Alien franchise, I think, is to show where it came from. And yeah, now we do know. It's crazy to think, But yeah, so David created the xenomorph. How do I feel about that? Personally, if I didn't like David as a character, I would have hated it. But since I like David as a character, I'm with it. I'm on board with it. Because, at the end of the day, even if you don't like it, it still doesn't make Alien a bad movie. Because you can watch it on its own, and it's fucking a brilliant horror film. There's a reason why it's so iconic. There's a reason why, it's in our archives in the United States, like for great movies. You know what I mean? Because it is one. It needs to be preserved. So even if you don't like the fact that David created it, that's fine because Alien's still good. But since this is Ridley's baby, basically, he wanted this in there, and it is what it is. You got to accept it. You got to take it in. I mean, you can obviously argue that, well, maybe David didn't create the xenomorph. Maybe he just created this particular one. Because obviously, if the engineers were developing these nanotechnology, these little like biological weapons, and I'm sure that they weren't the only ones, like humans might not have been the only living creatures they interacted with. So, maybe they've used this bomb elsewhere, and maybe this biological weapon would evolve naturally to what would become the xenomorph. It makes me think that maybe the xenomorph isn't the ultimate form, though. I mean, is it the ultimate form, or is it the ultimate form with the resources that David had at his disposal? I don't know. It's interesting to think. But so there's also, I mean, it's just interesting to think about how there's going to be at least 1 to 2 more of these movies after this one. Ridley said 1 to 2 more. I personally think there'll probably be 1 more, but if it does well, 2 more. Last I checked, I believe this movie made like 130 million against 100 million like budget without marketing and stuff like that. That's kind of a bust, especially when Prometheus made 400 million and shit like that, and this one didn't. But I hope there's another one. I really do, just because Ridley Scott doing science fiction is just awesome. But it makes you think, okay, if all of these movies are gonna end up tying right back into the moment where the spaceship crashes on LV-426, which Ridley Scott has said, obviously I've shown that he's changed his mind over the years. But if it does lead to that, you got to think, okay, well, who's going to be in the chair? Like, who's the creature, the space jockey that they find in the original Alien? And when I was thinking about this, I came across an article, and I had a thought during the movie. At the very, very end, when you get the last final twist of everything, basically everybody dies. That's the final twist, except David. And David and the main girl, she doesn't die, but she gets basically put into cryostasis. And you already know what David did to Shaw, so you know that other girl's dead too. And he's on the colonial ship now. He disguised himself as Walter, because everyone thinks he's Walter, because Walter and David have this fight because they're the same fucking androids. But anyway, just updated versions of the other one. And so yeah, they kill both xenomorphs, because there's 2 xenomorphs in the movie. Kill them both, and yeah, then David has full access to all the embryos in the world that he would need to continue his experimenting, which is why I'm saying, does the xenomorph we know today, is that the final form? Like, I don't know. Maybe this movie is going to veer way past Alien. Maybe this movie has nothing to do with Alien, and we're just being fucking given a run for our money. Like, maybe there's other engineer worlds. Maybe this movie will become Alien 4. Alien 5, I should say. I forgot Resurrection counts. Maybe the next one will be Alien 5. And what I mean by that is we resume, the year 2200 and we find David again. I don't know. I'm just saying, like, I don't believe that truly, but this is me just riffing. But, I had this thought in the theater at the end as well. My point was, where David was looking through all the embryos and stuff like that. And he's basically, I looked at all those things as now xenomorphs now. I didn't look at them as humans. And so I was thinking, well, he's the only one alive, quote unquote, in this ship. Now, what if he's the space jockey? Because obviously Prometheus established that that's a suit, okay? It's a space suit that the engineers were inside of. They wear to like travel around and shit. So after Prometheus, you're led to believe that there was an engineer in that suit, okay, or at least maybe some maybe. Well, it doesn't. You don't know. It's either a human or an engineer, right? Like that's what you're led to believe because based on the events of Prometheus, if it would have been more of the original script, it would have been Shaw or someone like that being bursted out of, in the original Alien, or maybe even an engineer or something like that, but it wasn't. Because that would have been really interesting to end Prometheus that way. Like, think about it. Like, the engineer's in the ship and he's trying to like navigate, and then the fucking neomorph pops out, and then all of a sudden that evolved into the xenomorph, which kind of, maybe, but you don't know. You really don't know. So obviously that's not what happened in Prometheus. So at the end of this movie, since all the human players are pretty much dead, like I said, obviously this movie doesn't lead into Alien, but I was like, oh, what if David is the one being birthed somehow? Because as I mentioned earlier, Shaw took out all of his like circuitry when she was rebuilding him in the flashback, and he had like no wires and stuff like that. He was it was more and who knows, maybe David's experimenting on himself, and he starts to make himself more and more human. I don't know. I don't know what he wants to do, what he's going to do on the spacecraft, but he has a lot of time on his hands. So I read an article and it speculated something similar, and I was like, oh, that's really interesting how it could work if it was him. Because the article, I believe it was an IGN article, they presented the argument that Peter hated his creator, and he wanted to know like what it was about, so he created David to help him do that. And then David hated Peter Wayland because he made him, and he felt like David was being limited because he couldn't do what he wanted to do, right? And so there's a scene in Prometheus at the very end when Peter Wayland gets killed by the engineers, who we find out created Peter, because we find out in Prometheus that the engineers are the ones who created all of humanity. So that was what was so interesting about, like, why would they hate us if they created us, which is adding that Jesus angle in there, right? Where Peter Wayland gets killed with David's head. So the creator kills his creation with his creation. So it was like this weird, interesting twist where it was like, okay, that's been established in Prometheus that it's all, and even in Covenant, there's a line about creationism, like, I believe in creationism. Like, do you believe in evolution or creationism or something like that? And David's like, I believe in creationism. And in the context of that moment, it was the only time where I thought to myself, holy shit, creationism could be fucking valid. Because of the context of David creating creatures. I mean, and if someone created us, creationism might be, but that might mean that there's like a symbiotic relationship between creationism and evolution, because obviously David is evolving these creatures through experiments. One could argue that that's the creator manipulating his experiments, but I don't know. I'm just saying, for the first time ever, I'm like, oh wow, this could be valid. And I grew up Catholic and shit, so so yeah, there's that scene in Prometheus where Wayland gets killed by David's head. And so, like I said, the creator is killing his creation with his creation, with the creation's creation. And tie that back in to the first Alien, if the xenomorph bursts from David's chest, that would follow the tradition of, set up in Prometheus, David's creation killing David. Because David's not around in any of the Alien movies, so he needs to die somehow, or something needs to happen to him. And if he has an arc right now, he went from being created to creating himself, and the third one is when he'd ultimately have to be killed, because that's the story that's been set up, that the creator kills, the creation kills the creator. I don't know, it's just an interesting theory. Let's see. I mean, that's kind of it. I mean, I've been talking for an hour now. I expected this to go on for a little bit shorter than it is, but I really enjoyed this movie. It wasn't perfect by any means. It was not perfect. I left the movie feeling content though, and it's sad for me to say that like at this point, like the amount of movies I've seen in the theaters lately that I've left disappointed. Like for me to just say I didn't leave disappointed was like a plus. It's a bad thing. But there was definitely some good moments into it. I've obviously was able to expand upon some ideas that were central to this movie, which I probably wasn't able to do in Prometheus unless I really stretched it. And now I want to revisit Prometheus because of this movie. So, like I said, it worked on two levels. It worked on making the original better. Not the original, but I mean the original is in the first Prometheus. Um, and then it just worked as a horror movie and it worked as a science fiction movie, but together it kind of was a little choppy and uneven, but there's definitely a lot to go for. Um, so yeah, let's wrap this one up. Let me know what you guys think. Do you guys agree, disagree? Do you feel like I'm dumb? I'm close. I'm borrowing from too many other articles I might have read. What are your theories? Do you think that David's going to be the one in the space suit at the end of this whole like reboot, prequel, not reboot, but like this whole prequel shit? Or who do you think's going to be in there? Do you think it's going to be a Predator? Do you think that the fourth film that Ridley Scott has in mind is like his true version of Alien versus Predator? I would watch that, by the way. But anyway, subscribe, dngtalk.com. Me and Gian are going to be recording a podcast tomorrow, episode 40. Woo! So expect that, and yeah, expect more videos like this. Hopefully this green background CGI blah blah. I tried to do something different. I tried to record this last night and I was about 30 minutes in and I forgot to roll the sound. So this is actually the second one, but I think it's way better. So I'm actually glad the sound stopped working last night. But yeah, with that, I'm out, guys. Fight on. Later.